What is the best sandwich? For just in general, like for me, what would I order?
To you, what is the
BLT.
best sandwich?
For decades, Sandra Bullock has been known as Hollywood's most private A-list woman, smart, guarded, and fiercely independent. But behind that carefully controlled image lies a question fans have quietly asked for years. Who did Sandra Bullock truly desire? Not the men tabloids forced into headlines, but the ones she openly admired, hinted at, or jokingly admitted she would want beside her when the cameras were off. In rare interviews and unscripted moments, Sandra let her guard down just enough to reveal something far more honest than scandal. Attraction rooted in intelligence, strength, and emotional safety. Tonight, we're not dealing in rumors. We're revisiting 6 men whose names surfaced through her own words, body language, and telling pauses men who matched the life she wanted, not the fame she escaped. Some names will surprise you. One may change how you see Sandra Bullock forever. Number 1. Keanu Reeves. When people talk about chemistry that never needed a scandal to feel real, the name that always rises to the top is Keanu Reeves. Long before social media rediscovered him as the internet's boyfriend, Keanu was already the quiet ideal Sandra Bullock gravitated toward. Their connection began in the mid-1990s, at a time when Hollywood still believed romance had to be loud, public, and aggressively marketed. What made this bond different was its restraint. Sandra later admitted that she had a crush on Keanu during their early years working together, a confession delivered not with embarrassment, but with the calm honesty of a woman looking back without regret. What mattered wasn't physical attraction alone. Keanu represented emotional safety, a man untouched by ego, uninterested in Hollywood games, and grounded by personal loss. In an industry filled with performers chasing the spotlight, he stood still, and that stillness spoke volumes. What resonates deeply with older audiences is the tragedy of timing. Both Sandra and Keanu later acknowledged that the feeling was mutual, yet neither acted on it. No betrayal, no dramatic fallout. Just 2 people moving forward with their lives, carrying a quiet what-if that never needed answers. For Sandra Bullock, Keanu Reeves wasn't the man she pursued. He was the one who showed her what genuine, uncomplicated connection looked like. Number 2. Ryan Reynolds. If Keanu Reeves symbolized emotional depth, Ryan Reynolds represented something entirely different: laughter as survival. When Sandra and Ryan worked together, audiences noticed it instantly: the effortless banter, the playful tension, the sense that neither was trying to impress the other. It didn't feel like flirtation designed for cameras. It felt like 2 adults who genuinely enjoyed being in the same space. Sandra has often spoken about how humor became essential to her later in life, especially after personal betrayals that reshaped her trust in people. Ryan's charm wasn't rooted in arrogance or bravado. It came from self-awareness. He made fun of himself first. For a woman who had been burned by confidence without character, that mattered. Behind the jokes, there was mutual respect. Both were navigating complicated personal chapters at the time, and neither crossed lines that didn't need crossing. That restraint is precisely why their connection fascinated fans over 50. It reflected a mature understanding that not every attraction is meant to become a relationship. Some exist to remind you that joy is still possible. Ryan Reynolds wasn't the man Sandra Bullock wanted to settle down with. He was the reminder that companionship doesn't always come wrapped in permanence. Sometimes it arrives to help you breathe again, laugh again, and trust your instincts after heartbreak. Number 3. Matthew McConaughey. Where the first 2 men represented safety and humor, Matthew McConaughey embodied something more: instinctive masculinity without intimidation. Matthew was never the polished Hollywood gentleman. He was relaxed, grounded, and deeply comfortable in his own skin. For Sandra, that authenticity was magnetic. In interviews, Sandra has hinted at her attraction to men who don't need to perform strength because they already possess it. Matthew fit that description effortlessly. He projected confidence without aggression, intelligence without arrogance. Unlike many leading men of his era, he didn't chase prestige roles for validation. He chose projects that aligned with his values, something Sandra herself would later prioritize. What intrigued observers was how their connection existed more in theory than reality. There was admiration, curiosity, and mutual understanding, but no urgency. By the time Sandra had truly clarified what she wanted from a partner, Matthew had already found stability elsewhere. And that, again, is a pattern familiar to viewers with life experience. Clarity often arrives after opportunity has passed. Matthew McConaughey wasn't a missed chance in the romantic sense. He was proof of growth. By recognizing what drew her to him, Sandra Bullock revealed how her priorities had evolved, away from drama, toward balance, depth, and peace. Number 4. George Clooney. Among Hollywood's most enduring male archetypes, few names carry the weight of George Clooney. For Sandra Bullock, Clooney represented a version of masculinity that Hollywood once prized above all else: composed, worldly, and quietly authoritative. Their friendship unfolded without spectacle, built on shared experience rather than manufactured chemistry, and that distinction matters. Sandra has long been drawn to men who understand the cost of fame, not those still chasing it. Clooney, already seasoned by success and public scrutiny, knew how to exist beyond the headlines. He didn't need validation. He didn't over-explain himself. For a woman who spent decades protecting her private life from intrusion, that kind of restraint was deeply appealing. What fascinated longtime observers was how naturally their bond remained platonic. There was admiration, yes, but also an unspoken agreement that not every connection needs to be romanticized. Clooney symbolized something Sandra respected: a man comfortable with solitude, yet capable of deep loyalty. In many ways, he mirrored her own emotional discipline. For audiences over 50, this dynamic feels familiar. Attraction doesn't always demand action. Sometimes it exists as mutual recognition, two people acknowledging shared values without disrupting their separate paths. George Clooney wasn't a fantasy or a regret for Sandra Bullock. He was a benchmark, a reminder of the kind of man she considered worthy of trust, even if only as a companion in understanding. Number 5. Brad Pitt. If George Clooney embodied composure, Brad Pitt represented complexity. Brad was never simply a heartthrob. He was a man whose public image constantly clashed with his private struggles. And that contradiction is precisely what made him intriguing to Sandra Bullock. Sandra has often shown empathy toward people navigating personal chaos beneath polished exteriors. Brad's career, marked by extraordinary success and equally public missteps, reflected a vulnerability Hollywood rarely admits. For Sandra, attraction wasn't about perfection, it was about awareness. A man who understands his flaws is far more compelling than one pretending not to have any. Their connection, subtle and largely speculative, lived more in conversation than action. There were moments of warmth, shared circles, and unmistakable mutual respect. Yet timing again played its familiar role. Both were dealing with deeply personal chapters, and neither appeared willing to invite unnecessary complication into an already demanding life. For older viewers, Brad Pitt represents the reality that desire doesn't fade with age, it matures. It becomes selective, thoughtful, cautious. Sandra Bullock didn't need Brad Pitt, the movie star. She was drawn to the human behind the image, someone who had been broken publicly and was still standing. Brad Pitt wasn't a chapter she pursued. He was a mirror, reflecting the understanding that attraction can exist without ownership. In a world obsessed with coupling and headlines, Sandra's restraint spoke louder than any rumor ever could. Number 6. Brian Randall. The final name stands apart because Brian Randall was never meant for public consumption. He wasn't a movie star. He didn't walk red carpets. And that, more than anything, explains why he mattered most. Brian Randall entered Sandra Bullock's life quietly, without spectacle or expectation. A photographer by profession, he existed outside the machinery that had shaped and, at times, wounded her. With him, Sandra wasn't an icon or a headline. She was simply a woman rebuilding her sense of safety. This connection wasn't born from fantasy or admiration at a distance. It grew from presence from shared routines, private laughter, and the kind of emotional steadiness that only reveals itself over time. For a woman who had endured betrayal and public scrutiny, Brian offered something rare: normalcy. Sandra never framed this relationship in dramatic terms. There were no grand declarations, no performances for the media, and that restraint revealed everything. Brian Randall wasn't the man she desired in theory, he was the man she chose in practice. That distinction resonates deeply with audiences who understand that lasting companionship rarely looks glamorous. For viewers over 50, this final chapter carries weight. It speaks to second chances, quieter love, and the courage to prioritize peace over passion. Brian Randall represented not escape, but arrival the moment Sandra Bullock stopped searching and allowed herself to rest. In the end, this story was never about scandal, secrets, or tabloid fantasies. It was about understanding how a woman like Sandra Bullock evolved emotionally, spiritually, and personally through the men who crossed her path. Each name represented a moment in time: curiosity, healing, laughter, reflection, and finally, peace. For those who have lived long enough to know that love is rarely simple, her journey feels deeply familiar. What makes Sandra's story resonate with audiences over 50 is its honesty. Attraction didn't always lead to action. Chemistry didn't always demand commitment. And the loudest relationships were not the ones that mattered most. Instead, her life reminds us that wisdom often arrives quietly, after the noise fades. If this story stirred memories of your own, the people you admired, the chances you didn't take, or the love that arrived later than expected, you're not alone. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which connection surprised you the most? And do you believe true love gets clearer with age? Your voice matters here. Stay with us for more untold stories from classic Hollywood where fame fades, but truth endures.